Hello and welcome. I'm Roger Ream, and this is the Liberty and Leadership Podcast, a conversation with TFAS alumni who are making a real impact in politics, public policy, government, business, philanthropy, law, and the media. Today, I'll be speaking with Bryce Mitchell. Bryce was a member of the TFAS International Affairs program in 2014. As a United States Air Force captain and a mentor to students and young professionals, his work really has brought him around the world. Bryce, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really looking forward to hearing about your career and what you've been doing since you attended a TFAS program in 2014.
Yeah, thank you, Roger. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, well, I think this is going to be a great conversation, partly because of your great service in the U.S. Air Force, which we appreciate very much, your passion for climbing mountains and biking, the work you do in the volunteer sector, and many other topics that we'll be covering. And so we're definitely proud of you as someone we claim as an alum of a Fund for American Studies program. Why don't we start with, could you tell us a little bit about, where you grew up and kind of what led to your decision to go to the U.S. Air Force Academy?
Sure. Well, I grew up in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Both of my parents were Air Force veterans. They both served for about 4 to 5 years each. And so public service was something that they always championed. And I remember the first time visiting Colorado Springs, I must have been 8 years old. We were driving on the highway I-25. My dad pointed over to the academy. You could just make out the spires of the chapel. And he said,
Yeah.
that's a very tough school to be accepted into. And I always remembered that. And I said, well, maybe I should work towards that. And actually, a few years later, I was sitting in a library in high school, and I learned of a cadet named Henry L. Flipper. He was the first African American cadet to graduate from West Point, and I was fascinated by his story. I think it was 1874, and that really resonated with me. And I decided to apply to all of the academies, and I was accepted to the Air Force Academy. So that's where I went.
Well, wonderful, wonderful. That's a great honor to get in there. I know it's a very competitive process, and you excelled there academically and in all other extracurricular ways. Was it a great experience for you? I know that first year can be a tough one, but overall, I assume you had a great experience at the academy.
I did have a great experience. That first year is always tough, but I found that during that first year, that's where you make your friends. That's where you make those bonds because you're going through something pretty tough. So I was a track and field athlete, and that's where a lot of my friendships were on that team. But yeah, just living in Colorado, you can't beat that. Skiing, cycling, being able to run on the track team, and then on just having the opportunity to go to a school like that where they bring in speakers from all across government, all across the Air Force, and it was a great time. And TFAS was definitely a highlight for me.
Well, yeah, that's for those who are listening and don't know it. TFAS has had a relationship with the Air Force Academy since the mid 1980s, and it seems that every summer they select some of their very top students to attend our programs in Washington, D.C. in the summer and programs overseas. And so it's been just great to have this relationship with the Air Force Academy. The students bring so much to the program, partly because you have made that commitment to service in the military. And I think it reflects well on you. And then you're in a program where you can talk with other students about that decision you made to take up military service. When you're at a TFAS program, you can be a positive influence. But you were selected in 2014. You came to our International Affairs program, and you took all full advantage of it. I'm so happy that you were able to intern for Secretary Donald Rumsfeld, the late Don Rumsfeld, in his office in Washington. That must have been a special time for you.
Sure. But if I could go back about a year, because my journey to TFAS really grew out of at the time what I thought was kind of in my athletic career a tragedy because I ended up having an injury going into my sophomore year that took me out for pretty much the rest of the season. And for the first time in my life, I visited Washington D.C. that spring break, and I said, just I'm amazed by the city. I definitely would, if I ever got a chance, I would like to intern here. And so that was in the back of my mind. And then later on that summer, also around the same time, I was accepted into a trip to Israel. So these two really formative experiences. I went through the Air Force Academy and met up with 10 other cadets from the Naval Academy, West Point, and we had a full tour of Israel, Jerusalem, the Golan Heights, down to the Negev Desert, and just working with the IDF, learning a bit about some of the security situation. So it was with that experience that I applied for the TFAS program, knowing that I wanted to work in DC, and knowing that I wanted to intern as well. So that really grew out of that injury that I had on the track team. So, but my time with Secretary Rumsfeld was amazing. In fact, I originally hoped I knew the TFAS could pair you up with embassies and you could work in that space. So when I received the email from, I think it was, I don't know if it was Rimley or Sarah who sent me the email saying you've been selected as a potential candidate. You just have to interview. I just remember going back. I knew who Secretary Rumsfeld was, but I knew that I had to do a bit more reading, a bit more research. And yeah, but that's kind of what led to it. But yeah, my time with him was by far the highlight of my time in DC.
Yeah, well, that track and field injury reminds me of that old saying, that when one door closes, another one opens somewhere, and you had that track and field season ending abruptly, but it led to what incredible opportunities. That visit to Israel must have really been something, and very impactful for a military academy cadet to experience. Was Secretary Rumsfeld, I know, did a lot in his office. He's generally always writing books. I had a nephew who interned in his office when he was writing his biography, and then he wrote Rumsfeld's Rules and other books. What kind of office was it like when you were there?
Well, the first thing that the main task that we worked on at first was it was myself and another TFAS intern, Kyle. We were charged with archiving some of his personal papers for the Library of Congress. So that was a fascinating experience going through reading and understanding how he thought, helping with some of the correspondence. And then the second piece, it was really research because if anyone knows Secretary Rumsfeld, he was famous for these snowflakes. So even in his office, he would task out taskings via the snowflake method, which is, if someone doesn't know, if the viewers don't know what a snowflake is, but essentially it was a memo that it was a memo system that he used at the Pentagon. He sent it must probably millions of these things throughout his career in government. You would receive one, you'd have a question, and you'd have to research it, get it done, and it would also have a date. You'd have to respond back. So even in that office environment, with only 6 of us, he still liked to use that system. And of course, he had his Central Asian Fellows program because he really wanted to build up a leadership cadre in Central Asia and continue to build linkages and ties between a lot of the Central Asian countries. So being able to help out there, as well as the military charity side. So it was those 4 tasks with a small team, constant interaction with Secretary Rumsfeld, which I just remember thinking, wow, that's his stand-up desk. That's what he used. That's where a lot of his monumental decisions were made at the Pentagon. You can still see it in his office. So.
Yeah, yeah. He had quite an office. I've gone there for tours where he'd show you all the things hanging on the walls, the photos, the letters, the honors he'd received in his career. So you then went back and finished your education at the academy, and now you've had quite a series of experiences in your Air Force career. I think it's taken you to the Korean Peninsula. If I'm not mistaken, you did work on Africa from maybe from London. Went to graduate school. Been at the Department of Defense. Uh, that's a lot in a short period of time. Uh, talk. I'd love to talk a little about South Korea because I know that led you to also be working with refugees there. So if you could speak to that experience in South Korea, I mean, it's obviously a very tense place to be working in the military for our country. So
Sure.
and you probably can't tell us everything, but talk a little bit just about the experience being there. And I should mention, I know we'll get into this in a little bit, but you're an avid mountain climber, and so I'll come back to all these places to talk about some of the mountains you've climbed in your life. But first, let's talk a little more of the military side
Sure.
of South Korea.
I'd be happy to. So I was going through intelligence training in San Angelo, Texas, about 2017. If you remember, July 4th, 2017 is when the North Koreans launched an ICBM. They chose that day for a reason. There was a definite message to Washington. Um, that was a week before I found out that I had been selected for a position in South Korea. I'd be working with the Army, the 2nd Infantry Division, where I would be helping to train essentially the ROK forces, the Republic of Korean forces, as well as the U.S. Army on all things Air Force, aerial, kind of ISR, intel collection aircraft. So that was going to be my first position. And as I prepared to leave, which I ended up getting on the ground there around August, October timeframe, I could just see that this was going to be a very tense time. You could see the
Yeah,
messaging, you could see the discussions in Washington. The tensions were very high, and just to be a fly on the wall during these major exercises, where almost every single one was one of the largest of the alliance, because we were surging. We were really, it was a show of force, trying to deter the North Koreans from taking any other steps, and really trying to force them to a diplomatic off ramp. That diplomatic off ramp came. There was essentially in the spring with the Pyeongchang Olympics. So to go from high tensions, training the Korean forces, going to these major exercises, to the Olympics, where you see 3 summits within a few months, it was a very impactful experience for me, to be, because the thing about Korea, one of the reasons, I think it was a colonel that told me before I left. He says it's strategic and tactical. It's got everything. You're working a tactical mission. You have to become an expert, but at the same time, you're in the Korean theater of operations. But every decision you make, or potentially could make, could have strategic implications. So it's a combination of both. You can understand the tactical side of your job, but at the same time, you know that 60 miles north of you, there are extreme consequences, and it becomes very strategic very quickly. So it was, I couldn't have been a better first year as an intel officer.
yeah, yeah. Were you able to take in any of the Olympic games?
I did. I actually watched the first gold medal. It was a guy named Red Gerard. I think he was a snowboarder. His last his last run, he ended up sticking it and winning gold. First gold medal with the Olympics. So that was definitely pretty awesome.
Yeah, good. While you were there, you also did some work with refugees. Is that correct?
That's true. That was the I was there for 2 years. So the second year, um, I stumbled across an organization called Teach North Korean Refugees. I didn't realize this, but the the challenges for North Korean defectors, they don't end right when they leave their country. In fact, in some ways, it becomes a bit more difficult. They're away from their family. They don't know what's happening to their family back in North Korea. Um, in some cases, it's taken them 5 to 7 years after they cross the Yalu River in the north to make it through China, make it through Southeast Asia, and finally find a South Korean embassy that takes them to Seoul. But once they do, they realize that you have to become a contributing citizen. And one of the ways you can do that is to quickly learn English. So this Teach North Korean Refugees English it's a nonprofit that essentially it helps teach those skills, English skills, to North Korean defectors, because it's really unfortunate because that it's a very very tough community. You it just really is you to be able to help them, and I was able to work with one. She's about 35 years old from North Korea. The main thing she wanted to do was actually learn how to sing Disney songs. So I remember the song she brought was Elsa. So this is what she wanted to learn how to sing from the movie. So
Yeah.
I was helping her sound out these words. I don't think I had much of a pitch or anything. I can't
Well,
sing
I won't.
myself.
Don't worry. I
That's
won't
what she
ask you to
wanted to
sing
learn
it
how to
today.
sing.
So
Yeah, please. Yeah, please don't. But
yeah.
yeah, because that's what, in some ways, she knew that. Yeah, that's what I wanted to do. So um, that was a pretty amazing experience.
Did you have the opportunity to hear about some of their experiences of life in the North? I imagine it was pretty meager
I definitely
existence.
did. Very meager existence. Always constantly looking behind your back. It's hard to trust others, and just knowing that we weren't supposed to pry into that aspect of their life, because for some
Yeah.
of them, honestly, it seems like a good way for you to um, make some money on the side as a North Korean defector is to work with the South Korean military, provide briefings on life in North Korea, and it seems like at times they just wanted to stop talking about it and focus on their studies, because their other job would be to address these issues and constantly have to discuss it. But she did share that her family was still in North Korea. So
Yeah, yeah, I've had the chance to hear some of those defectors speak who've come to the U.S., and I know it's quite a testimonial they deliver when you hear them talk about life there, uh, and the transition
and
to
many of them were actually taught through the program.
yeah.
In fact,
Well, I imagine that
yeah,
that's right, and I imagine the transition must be extremely difficult if you've been raised in the kind of society that North Korea is like. And then you went in your career, then took you to London, and you got a master's at the King's College there. And am I allowed to say what your master's was in? Espionage, is that right?
sure. It's essentially yeah, Intel studies. That's what they call it.
Yeah,
the,
yeah.
the university calls it.
Was that a very international experience, the master's program there?
So for me, I was living in Cambridge, and for the 2 years that I was there during the pandemic lockdown, so most of the programs were
Oh,
distance learning.
yeah.
So while working with our British partners, whether it's through um, their GCHQ and all their intel agencies, we I found that like I really wanted to learn more about some of their history, and then also the parallels between the US IC and the British IC, and that's why I wanted to study um, intel studies from King's College London, and yeah, because it was largely because of the interactions that I was having with the British IC on a day to day basis with my job over at Africom.
And now you've returned to the U.S. You're here in Washington D.C. working at DoD, but you're also doing a fellowship, Defense Venture Fellows program. Tell us just if you could a little bit about that, whatever you can. That sounds like an interesting mix of different people from different places.
Sure, yeah. The Defense Ventures program is an awesome program for anyone who's a DoD civilian, guard, active duty, or reservist, enlisted to officer, and it's essentially a program for 8 weeks. They give you the opportunity to work with either like a defense tech company, startup level, seed, pre-seed, sometimes they're Series A, that size, or a venture capital fund that's focused on investing in defense tech or dual use tech that has both a commercial gain, commercial benefit, and a government benefit at the same time. So I've been paired with a company called the fund called Mark Ventures. The managing director was formerly the managing director for the Army Venture Capital Corporation. guy by the name of Jake Chapman, and it's been an amazing experience. Really, just understand how what are the incentives for the venture community? How can the government incentivize them to invest in like deep tech and the critical technologies that we really do need? And programs like these are really great because you really do need a conduit between the DoD, Washington, and the Valley, whether it's the investment side or the startup side. So it's just great being able to work with Jake's team.
Well, good. That's great. And it was interesting to read about that program. Well, let's shift back. I think it was at the graduation from the Air Force Academy when I came out there, and we had a small luncheon at the superintendent's house afterwards, and had the chance to have testimonials from the cadets that we hear every year. But I remember you telling me around that time that you were heading off to climb Mount Kilimanjaro, and if memory serves me right, you went there with your father and your brother.
Actually, it was a few friends from the academy, a few of my
Okay. Okay.
classmates.
I have that wrong,
Um,
but yeah. So
but you're right. It's
were you already into climbing mountains at that time?
Yeah, honestly, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to live in Colorado, serve, go to the Air Force Academy. But the Rocky Mountains, I'm an Eagle Scout. Grew up fishing, camping, not so much skiing. Picked that up later at the academy. But yeah, that is something that I've always liked to do. And in a way, I find that it helped keeps me grounded, as well as work-life balance is so important. So I would always look forward to like training. One of the best times is when you're training for an objective like that. You know that because it's high stakes. It's not. I'm not a marathoner. I run a few triathlons, but when you're climbing a mountain like that, you know that you have to be physically fit, because if you start moving slow up at altitude, that's where danger can happen. That's where accidents can occur. So it's high stakes training. So you really focus up. But Kilimanjaro was great. First time climbing in Africa. Started ice climbing in South Korea. Joined. I think you want to maybe go back to that South Korea climbing story, but I essentially joined Seoul Mountaineering Club. I spoke a little bit of Korean, so I started to learn some of the climbing lingo in Korean, because none of these guys spoke English. And we climbed multiple times throughout essentially it's the mountains north of Seoul. If you ever seen a photo of Seoul, just tons of mountains north of the city. So we would climb multiple times, communicating just enough, learn to ice climb with them as well. And yeah, so it's definitely something that I like to do on the side when I'm not working some Air Force issue.
So have you been able to find the time still to keep doing your climbing?
Not so much in DC. In
No, we don't have
England,
many mountains
yes,
to climb
took
here.
5 trips to the Alps.
5 trips to the Alps?
Yeah, no, there's an area in West Virginia. 5 trips to the Alps. Just 3 or 4 day weekends, if we ever were given those. So Mount Blanc, Slovenia, Austria, and then trip to Italy 2 times. So
Have you tackled many 14,000 plus peaks? I know Colorado has quite a few.
have you climbed? I've actually climbed 30 of them.
Okay, 30,
when I was
yeah.
at the academy.
I've got one on my list. It's in Colorado, Longs Peak, which is in Rocky Mountain National Park. It's about 14,260, I think. But I'll share my
I think you're
experience.
right. Yeah, that is.
I'll share my experience, because you reminded me of it when you said you got to keep moving because you get into trouble when you don't. Is I got up to the top of the mountain, and it was probably a half an hour of sitting, eating half a sandwich, apple juice, and then all of a sudden, like, the altitude sickness set in, and I started throwing up. I said, I'm never going to get down from here. They're going to have to send a helicopter up to rescue me. But I found the will to make it back down. But I think I should have just turned around when I got to the top after a 5-minute break and headed back down. because it wasn't a pleasant feeling when I got up there and started feeling sick. But you do have that sense of accomplishment that comes with achieving something like that. And you said you've climbed 14,000 plus peaks. Is that right? That's
30.
remarkable.
Yep.
You've climbed Kilimanjaro in Africa and in Asia and the U.S. and you said the Alps. That's great to keep that passion going. You also like biking, don't you?
Yes. Big. Yep. Started that about 10, 15 years ago. For me, England is pretty flat. You go up to Scotland or you go up to the the Lake District.
Yeah.
It changes, but I cycled. I started a group, me and a buddy of mine, and we ended up just every Saturday we would cycle somewhere, whether it was to like a local coffee shop or something like that. But it's one of the best places to cycle, Cambridge.
Yeah.
It's relatively flat, but it's such beautiful countryside.
You're clearly a leader, someone who's gone to the Air Force Academy and serving in the military and the kinds of things you've done in your life already. Do you think we're still developing strong leaders, the kind that this country needs? What kind of thoughts do you have about leadership development that you could share with us today? I'd love to hear your thoughts about that because that's kind of what all we're about is developing courageous leaders because leaders have to have courage, of course. And you've had the opportunity to work with Don Rumsfeld, certainly a leader in his career. You have any thoughts you could share with us about leadership?
Sure. Yes, it definitely tough times do call for courageous and leaders with integrity. In fact, in preparation for this podcast, I was thinking back to my time, and I remembered how Secretary Rumsfeld, each intern, he would have us read Adlai Stevenson's address to the Princeton class of 1954. That was the year that he graduated from Princeton, and there's a line in there. I ended up rereading it a few days ago, and there's a line that I really wanted to take out and focus in on because I think it explains kind of why leadership is so important, why you need people to stand up when the times are tough. It's on the second page. So for if those young Americans who have the advantage of education, perspective, and self-discipline do not participate to the fullest extent of their ability, America will stumble, and if America stumbles, the world falls. Written 1954 during a time of great change as America stepped into this clear global role as a global leader. But I think it resonates even today. So I'm fully appreciative of the TFAS experience because I know that it's the leadership piece that I really gained. Honorable leadership, integrity, and then the mentorship piece because you do have to go out and find and support that next generation of the folks that are coming behind you. So that's why when I moved back to DC, I wanted to get back involved with the TFAS mentorship program and start working and identifying students who are interested in public service, whether it's military, government, nonprofit, local level, national level. But yeah, I appreciate some of the experiences that Mr. Rumsfeld provided me.
Yeah, well, no, we're grateful to you and many of our other alumni who have served as mentors in our program. And it was interesting this summer. It didn't really occur to me till I was at mentor evening we did. I've forgotten if you were there, but I think you were, where they went through a slideshow of about 35, 40 mentors, alumni, and many of them, more than I would have expected, had served in the military. Some had gone to academies, but others had just served later in the military. Some were still serving, but it reflects, a positive message there of your willingness to teach those lessons of self-discipline, of integrity, honorable leadership, and share them with the generation coming up right behind you. So we're grateful to you for the mentoring you've done for us and hope we'll continue to do. It's a feature we added to our programs about 10 years ago, and the students are eager to have mentors who can help give them advice from their experiences in life. So I think that quote captured it when you talked about self-discipline. Honorable leadership's always been very important. Courage is something that we've kind of put in the equation now, because our country does need those kinds of leaders. And I'm quick to point out too, and I like to mention it. That you can be a leader without necessarily serving in the military. I mean, I appreciate and say thank you to Bryce, to you, and to others who do choose to defend our country, take the oath of office to uphold our Constitution, serve in the military, because we need bright, young, courageous leaders in our military. But it's important for students, all our students, to know, even those not going into military careers, that leadership's needed in the business world, in finance, and government, especially honorable leadership, integrity. I mean, that's where I think when we fall down in our country today, it's because our leaders lack integrity. They lack that kind of courage and discipline, self-discipline that you've touched on. So you got me going here, Bryce. I think that's right on target. I appreciate what you had to say. Do you get the chance to go back to the academy or interact at all with the Air Force Academy or students there? Or are you just too busy in your Air Force career to do that?
Um, I haven't been back in a few years. I currently, there's a program that allows graduates and alumni to mentor, like virtually mentor a few cadets. So I'm taking part in that program.
Good,
Um,
good.
but I haven't been able to make it out to Colorado. I will be speaking to the Virginia Tech Corps of Cadets in about 3 weeks. I'm mainly going to be discussing honorable leadership and then the Air Force Intel career field, and I'm hoping that after I leave, there's a bunch of new interested ROTC cadets for the Intel career field.
Yeah, well, we did have it was a young woman this summer in our program who was in the Corps Cadets at Virginia Tech. So she may be in your audience when you speak to them. That's
She's
great.
actually behind the scenes, and she's actually the reason that I'm heading over there. Yeah,
Oh,
just
did
a
you meet this
connection
summer?
throughout the
Oh,
summer.
good, good. That's wonderful.
Yes,
I'm glad that
yeah,
was a connection through TFAS. Excellent, excellent. We
definitely. That was a TFAS connection.
Yeah, yeah. Well, as I mentioned at the outset, we've had Air Force cadets coming to our program since sometime in the 1980s, and the Coast Guard Academy has been very active in the past 15 years, thanks to a donor of ours who was a Coast Guard Academy graduate. We have West Point cadets coming. We haven't really struck up a lasting relation with the Naval Academy. So if you run across some Navy people in your career at the Pentagon, maybe you can talk up our program and we can get
Yeah,
more
and it's so
regular.
close. Wonder why
It's
not?
hard.
Yeah,
I think it's hard in part because of their summer obligations on ships, make it a little more difficult for them to carve out the time for our program. But we've had a few,
that
and
makes sense.
they're outstanding. Well, I know we don't have a lot of time left, but I would like to ask you uh, a bit more about kind of the future, what plans you might have, maybe in a role that you're in, and the military. You can't plan that long, but do you think you'll be in D.C. for a while, or are you going to be sent somewhere else around the globe before?
Still contemplating.
Do you have some say in that?
I do. Yeah,
Yeah,
you move every 2 to 3 years. Put your dream sheet, top few places you would like to
yeah,
go. Honestly, this Defense Ventures program has opened up some pretty amazing doors um, into the venture and defense tech community. And I'm seeing how, like you said, you don't need to be in uniform to serve. And you can really find ways to, whether it's through ideating on a tough issue that the government's trying to solve, that answer could be in a startup in Silicon Valley, you know. And I'm fascinated by this new, it's called American Dynamism. That's essentially the bucket term, but it's investing in companies that support the American interest. And Andreessen Horowitz, A16Z, they're the ones that are leading that one. But I think that there are lots of ways you can serve your country through other means. And in this case, with China has the whole civil military fusion. We have private public partnerships, here in the United States, and we need to make sure those are strong. Make sure that our ecosystems, whether it's Wall Street, Washington, Silicon Valley, continue to work together. So that's, who knows, that could be where I move later in my career.
Well, that's wonderful. My guest today has been Bryce Mitchell. Bryce is an honorable leader. We appreciate your service to our country, Bryce. We certainly appreciate your service as well to the Fund for American Studies. Hope we can count on you to continue to serve as a mentor in the future. And one of these days, we'll find time to get out on our bikes together and bike the WNOD trail around Virginia. I'd love to do that sometime with you. I don't know if I can keep up with you, but we'll give it a try.
No, I would like that. Thank you, Roger. Yeah,
good,
awesome.
Good. Thanks so much for being with us on the Liberty and Leadership Podcast. Bryce Mitchell. Bryce Mitchell's comments do not represent the positions of the U.S. Air Force, the Department of Defense, or any part of the U.S. government. Thank you for listening to the Liberty and Leadership Podcast. Please don't forget to subscribe, download, like, or share the show on Apple, Spotify, or YouTube, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you like this episode, I ask you to rate and review it. And if you have a comment or question for the show, please drop us an email at podcast@tfas.org. The Liberty and Leadership Podcast is produced at K Global Studios in Washington, D.C. I'm your host, Roger Ream, and until next time, show courage in things large and small.